let's now jump to 2014. So whereas 2012 had the polls seem to have had a bias in favor of Republicans against Democrats, and Republicans did a lot of work in terms of trying to figure out what went wrong. The polls in 2014 in many states went the other way. So the big story in 2014 was the battle for the control of the U.S. Senate. There was a number of big-time Senate races in Colorado, North Carolina, Georgia, Iowa, New Hampshire, Michigan, Louisiana, Arkansas, Kentucky, Alaska, South Dakota, and Maine. And as you can see, the average of the polls seemed to have underestimated how well Republicans would do, and sometimes to severely underestimate how Republicans would do. Whereas in Colorado, the average of the polls had the Republican winning by 2. The Republican ended up winning by 5. We also saw much more pronounced mistakes, whereas the average of the polls in Arkansas had the Republican winning by just under 5 percentage points, and the Republican ended up winning by 17 percentage points, Tom Cotton. In Kentucky, the Majority Leader Mitch McConnell was running for re-election, and the average of the polls had him winning by between 6 and 7 percentage points, 6.6 there on average. He ended up winning by over 16 percentage points. So it was a tough 2 elections for Republican pollsters. They got a little bit in trouble, and media pollsters, but Republican pollsters got a lot of criticism from their team, both for overestimating Romney's chances in 2012 and then underestimating how Republicans would do in 2014. Now, as an aside, why would the party care? Why would party leaders, party strategists care that they had underestimated the party's vote share in a couple of different states in 2014? Well, if you think that Arkansas is going to be close or Kentucky is close, they're making investment decisions. They're making decisions about where to put resources in the last week or 2 of the campaign. And it seems that those races were probably pretty safe, and those Republican resources that were directed towards Arkansas and Kentucky probably could have been better directed towards races that were likely to be more competitive. Let's now jump to talking about polls in a couple other countries, and don't want to necessarily spend a lot of time here, but there was a lot of talk following 2012, following 2014, leading up into the 2016 election, how polls were dead, how they weren't only getting it wrong in the United States, but they were getting it wrong in other countries, in other contexts as well. So there was an election in Israel in 2015. All the polls said it was going to be very close, and Bibi Netanyahu and the Likud party ended up with a fairly convincing win. In the United Kingdom, there were 2 mistakes. The polls underestimated the chances that Brexit would win, and I gave you a very, very interesting article to read about how polling was used or misused, and perhaps seriously misused in an unethical way in Brexit. But the polling around Brexit severely underestimated the chance that Leave would win. And before that, there were also some polls that were showing that it would be even between the Conservatives and Labour, but Conservatives ended up winning fairly convincingly. So it's been a tough time for polling in the United Kingdom, including in polling around the Scottish referendum, which showed that it was very close that Scotland might leave the United Kingdom, spurring policymakers to make many more promises in terms of tax breaks and money going to Scotland. And then it turned out that the referendum failed more comfortably than many people had considered. So there was this sense out there, and gave you a couple articles to read about this, about whether polling was broken. And in 2016, polling got off to a decent start. Seemed to be doing pretty well during the primaries, although ironically, all these polls that would show Donald Trump ahead, people would tend to ignore them, and all the polls that showed Hillary Clinton ahead in the primaries, people would tend to embrace them. But they ended up both getting it pretty right, both overall and at the state level, and Donald Trump and Hillary Clinton ended up becoming the nominees. But then, of course, and you, I think over one of my shoulders here, you are seeing a picture of a pretty shell-shocked Hillary Clinton. Well, that's Hillary Clinton giving her concession speech on the morning after the election in 2016 when she lost the presidency to Donald Trump.
This is painful, and it will be for a long time.
Which was not only a surprise to her, but as we talked about in the first lecture in the class, a surprise to just about all the pollsters and prognosticators. That you can look at polls in various different ways, and here's just a chart of a couple major polls, but you see all the polls, all the major polls, having Clinton winning 3, 4, 5, 6 percentage points in the national vote. Although Hillary Clinton did end up winning the popular vote by about 2 percentage points, and many in the polling industry will point to that and say, well, the national polls didn't have a problem. They were only off by a couple percentage points. They were all off in the same direction. Which suggests to me that there was some sort of misstep, some sort of bias when it came to polling in 2016. And I'll give you a little bit of a hypothesis in a second about why I think that happened. Do I think there was some conspiracy, against Trump in terms of the polling? No. As this chart shows, we've certainly seen polling mistakes in national polling over the years. In 2008, the polling was right on. The polling underestimated Barack Obama in 2012 more than it underestimated Donald Trump in 2018. So there's no partisan conspiracy in polling or media polling. You see mistakes on both sides, but in a second I'm going to come back to what I think was an issue in 2016, because there were virtually no, in fact, I think there were no real credible, nationally reportable polls that had Trump up or even had the race in that 1 or 2 percentage point national range. And then the mistakes at the state level were more pronounced. So it was where there was about a percentage point difference in overstating Hillary Clinton's vote at the state level. There was a 3 percentage point overstatement of Clinton, understatement of Trump at the state level, which led many people to underestimate Donald Trump's chances of winning, especially in 3 states, Pennsylvania, Michigan, Wisconsin, also polling in Iowa and Ohio. The polls nationally and also the polls in the state level got it wrong in 2 ways. They both underestimated the share of the electorate that would be Republicans. Democrats still ended up having an advantage nationwide, but it was less than Obama had in 2008 and 2012, less than Democrats enjoyed in 2008 and 2012. And also, Donald Trump did a little bit better with Republicans than people expected, and Hillary Clinton did a little bit worse with Democrats than people expected.